welcome back to another episode of the BSOC Bulletin, a podcast by the UNSW Business Society. I'm Britney, and today I'm here interviewing with Shreya. Our guest for this week is Anna Cheng, the current Growth Marketing Manager at Brighte. Hey Anna, how's your week been?
Yeah, my week's been great. I'm actually about to start a new role at HealthMatch as a SEO growth lead. So yeah, sort of like finishing up at Brighte now and about to start HealthMatch, which I'm really excited about.
Oh, that sounds super amazing. What are your plans for the weekend or the next few months?
So probably having a bit of a break between Brighte and HealthMatch and then doing just absolutely nothing. And then starting at HealthMatch, which is a bit of a learning curve actually. So probably digging into a lot of technical SEO, how to build links and stuff, which is something I haven't really focused on in the past. So I think it'll be really interesting for me.
Yep, so moving into the questions, are you able to give us a brief overview of your career since graduating from UNSW?
Yeah, I think personally for me, it's a little bit mixed together because what happened was when I was in uni, I actually started off as a tax accountant and I spent my first 2 years at uni, working in a small tax company in the city, filing through tax returns. And, it was really fun for the first 6 months. But then after that, I realized that the only thing that was changing was the name at the top of the piece of paper. I didn't feel like I was learning anymore. So when I was 19, I went, 0 to 100 and sort of started my own business. So with a couple of friends, we were trying to build out a marketplace that connected home chefs with consumers. So the general idea was, if you were cooking 4 portions of spaghetti at home, cooking that extra portion would be very, little marginal cost for you and your family. But if you sold it for, say, $9, you might actually be able to get the cost of your ingredients back or even make a small profit. I used to spend exam week at uni using the commercial kitchens, cooking up 60 portions of spaghetti with Dolmio sauce, seeing if people would pay $7 for it. Would people pay an extra $3 for delivery? Would people, pick it up from a central location or pick it up from someone else's house? Just used to run all these experiments and not really understand the frameworks behind it. How can I, run an experiment, gather data and learn from that? And, during that time, we'd even raised money off investors on terrible terms. And generally, I just feel like at that time, there wasn't enough support for startup founders, especially student entrepreneurs. Now it's a, completely different case, but back then it was sort of like a newer industry, less mature than it is now. So after that, I joined a startup accelerator program, which is when I got into my first growth hacker role. I actually just Googled what growth hacking was the night before my interview. I went in completely confident with here's your roadmap for the next year. You shouldn't even be doing B2B. You should be doing B2C. And, everything that came out of my mouth was, nonsense. But he was like, you seem to be really passionate about this business. So I'm going to hire you. So initially what started as a part-time role turned really quickly into a full-time role just because I loved what I was doing so much. So I was doing full-time uni, full-time work. My WAM was slipping. I wasn't sleeping at all. But I was having a lot of fun just rocking up to as many, meetups and conferences as I could to learn about exactly what growth hacking was. I used to literally write down every single word that they were saying and I would Google it at home later, try to understand, what exactly they meant. And there was a lot of stuff that wasn't actually true or was for the benefit of the speaker that, you would eventually learn was something that you shouldn't apply to work. And then there were other really good materials that now when I do public speaking, I like to pass on to, entry-level growth hackers as well. So I spent most of that year doing that. And eventually I'd been seen at so many events that the organizers recognized me and was like, hey, we really need female speakers. And, would you like to come and speak at the next event? And I just felt like such an imposter that I was like, no, sorry, I'm not even in Sydney that day. And he's like, don't worry about it. I'll change the date to something that works for you. And I literally had no excuse then and I had to go and do the talk. And actually at that talk was when the CEO of Spaceship found me. And this is why I sort of started my story at the beginning of uni rather than at the end of uni is because, when I decided that Spaceship was the perfect company for me, it was in the finance industry, it targeted millennials. And best of all, I just loved the team there. I actually ended up, quitting my banking internship that was meant to start the next day. I deferred uni for 1 whole year and I just did work full time. And, now that I look back, I think, oh, wow, what a rash decision. Like, what if I got fired in 2 months and I'd have no uni, no internship? But back then I didn't really think about that. I just wanted to see what would happen if I just really tried hard at something and focus all my attention onto it. And I felt like, no matter what happens, uni is my safety net. If the worst case scenario is I go back to uni, I end up in a corporate job and, I basically get the same ending that I would have otherwise gotten if I hadn't given this a go. So yeah, I joined Spaceship when they were at no customers. We were just 6 people on like 2 tables at the back of a co-working space, with, very little investment, and literally no product in market. So I was literally selling thin air at that point. And then, I helped to build it. And now today, Spaceship is at almost $1 billion in funds under management with like 200,000 Australians who use it to invest. So it was a really cool start to my career. After that, I, became head of growth of a company called Curious Thing AI. And then joined Brighte shortly after that. And then, my next move, I guess, is to HealthMatch.
Okay, yeah, wow. From the sounds of that, it seems like you can do so many things. Like, that's super impressive. I guess because I've personally used Spaceship myself, and I found it very intuitive, especially for like people who just want to get started investing. Kind of on the similar note of startups, like, how do you find investors for your products?
Yeah, so I think for me, it was because I had such a big imposter syndrome when I started at Spaceship. It was all about, really starting from a blank slate. I used to be an Elon Musk fangirl. And something that he used to always say was, you should always start from first principles. And what that meant is you should always, break everything down to, what are essential truths. So the most basic truth that and then build up from there. And the example he would give is that, when people were like building electric cars, it was always going to be too expensive, that it couldn't never become commercial. And what he said was like, well, hold on a second, like what's actually expensive about an electric car? It's all about the battery. And he's like, well, what if I reconstruct the battery and make it more affordable? Then I can start offering affordable electric cars. So, that was sort of his example of how you can break things down to first principles. And it's a completely scientific concept. So sometimes when I work in growth, I definitely think about it from a scientific perspective of, running experiments, doing some testing, looking at the data and using that to feed into your next experiment. So when I started at Spaceship, I actually spent my first 2 weeks just calling 200 people, running through customer persona surveys, figuring out what they were interested in. Why did you even sign up to Spaceship in the first place? What do you care about when it comes to superannuation? Why don't you currently like your superannuation fund? And how would you describe a product like this to your friends and your family? And, gathering all this data, I was able to really empathize with the customer that I was targeting, and which I found out to be tech millennials, which made a lot of sense because Spaceship's offering when I started was actually superannuation. So it was to get, tech millennials, interested in the super fund that offered a primarily technology portfolio. So the general hypothesis behind the investment strategy was, if, we live a completely different lives to our parents. So our parents, back when they were our age, they could buy a house for 2 to 3 times their income. They would probably stick with one career for, 10 years before changing. Whereas, for us, it's a completely different world. And so why are we still using the same financial products as our parents? Why are we invested in BHP and the big 4 banks as if, we're going to retire in 5 years when we actually have a 40-year investment horizon? So why aren't we invested in Amazons and your Facebooks and your Googles if we think that by the time we retire, technology is going to be what's driving the economy, not mining or not banking in particular. So, when I was able to find that audience, they just, resonated with that straight away. And then building marketing channels for that became really easy because I knew exactly where they hung out, which was Twitter, at meetups and things like that. And I was able to target them really well as well and very specifically. So I think it all comes down to really really us scoping out the problem and then coming up with, problem solving, coming up with strategies on how to really, discover the ways that they currently discover financial products, and then also seeing how they interact with these financial products so you can start building out a product that actually works really well for them. And so they don't just sign up and then churn from your product straight away.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to look at it. That was really actually inspiring, I think. Yeah, that was awesome. Anna, just circling back to growth hacking. Now, for our listeners and, us as well, what is growth hacking and what kind of skills are required to be a good growth hacker?
Yeah, so I think growth hacking teams, they pursue growth as a holistic system and goal. And it usually actually sits in between marketing, data, engineering, product management. So it's not really a purely marketing role. So what we do is we deploy really fast data-driven experiments to figure out what works and what doesn't work. And the analogy that I really like using is that if you imagine business as a bucket of water with, holes in the bucket where water's leaking out, the role of a growth marketing person is to actually patch up those holes and refill the water. So basically stop people from leaving your product and then also bring in new people to start using your product as well. And I guess, especially from people who are studying marketing at uni, I often get asked, like, what's different from growth hacking and traditional marketing? And I think, moving from marketing to growth is not really about terminology or even the tactics that you use. It's about a change in your mentality and the way you approach building processes and teams to grow a technology product, or a company. So for example, when I was doing marketing, I actually did a marketing minor in uni, which I, don't put on my LinkedIn or anything because I never finished it. But I would say that what I learned there was actually considered traditional marketing. So it typically focused on the first two layers of what we'd call like a funnel. And that's sort of like, brand awareness and also how acquisition. So how do you acquire customers? And this is particularly apparent when you see how traditional marketing teams are built and also what sort of goals are they operating against. So you'll notice that they tend to have KPIs that align with the top two layers of the funnel. So people would be like, hey, can you get me more leads? Can you get me more downloads? Can you get me new users? And if you were to draw this out on a graph, it would always be an increasing graph, like on a line graph. And the problem with this is that it doesn't actually tell you much about your business. Like you'll never get negative downloads. You'll never get negative signups. So like it will always be an increasing graph and you never know, what you're doing right, what you're doing wrong. And these marketing teams, because of this, they tend to be optimized more towards roles that are specifically marketing. So content, people in paid acquisition or copywriting or PR and so forth. What's not included is like your engineers, your designers, your product managers, your data scientists, and they tend to be completely different silos. So, for example, the most typical way you'd sort of see a team in an organization with traditional marketing is that you might see that activation and retention metrics get owned by the product team. The sales team might own the revenue metric. And then every organization, I guess, is differently structured. But the major point is that they're all like completely separate teams and departments. And when you compare this to like how we run growth marketers look at the funnel in a much more holistic way. So our KPIs are tied towards growth metrics that tell us a more complete picture of the business. So, we're looking more at week on week increase in leads, week on week increase in downloads. And when you draw this out on the graph, it really accounts for seasonality. So an example I can give is at Brighte, like we get because tradies are only really working Monday to Friday, we see like a major increase in the number of tradies that sign up to our platform from Monday to Friday, but you'll notice that it drops a lot on weekends. And then because we know this data from tracking, week on like daily signups, then we can say, okay, well, let's pause all our marketing efforts on the weekends because that's not a really strong day to market to tradies. Let's market to them during the weekday and, make the most out of our money. So I think, it's really important for growth people to be able to understand a holistic view of the business. And you can influence the growth rate by influencing any layer of the marketing funnel. The point is to just minimize the amount of drop-off points and turn that funnel into a tunnel, as corny as that may sound. But we operate towards different goals and the way we structure our team is completely different as well. So things like awareness and acquisition just become subsets of what we work with. So I think a really good example of someone who still doesn't really understand what growth hacking is, that is probably the most classic example of growth hacking is, Airbnb. So Airbnb's got a lot of great growth hacking stories. But when they first started out, they didn't actually gain much traction in New York. So the founders actually flew out, booked spaces with 24 hosts to figure out exactly what the problem was. So as it turned out, the users weren't actually doing a great job at presenting their listing. So hosts were just using their like crappy little Nokia phone cameras, taking really bad Craigslist quality pictures so that no one was really booking because no one could tell what they were paying for. And what happened was that they actually just ended up buying out a $5,000 camera and went door to door, taking as many professional photos of these New York listings as possible. And this led to 2 to 3 times as many bookings on New York listings. And by the end of the month, like Airbnb's revenue in the city had already doubled. And then eventually, because this test/experiment worked so well, they were able to develop an Airbnb photography program. So they leveraged their sales team, they leveraged their product team to build out this photography program. And so that host could automatically schedule a professional photographer and photograph their space for a small fee. And this meant that 1, there was more bookings, which helped with acquisition metrics. And 2, this led to improved retention. So the retention metric of the host, because of that, now their properties are like 2 to 3 times more likely to be booked. They earn a lot more money, so they're more likely to stay on the platform. So I guess, if there was a question about, what sort of skills do we actually need to become a growth marketer? I think, growth marketer is perfect for people who enjoy problem solving and working in a fast-paced environment. I actually genuinely think you don't need any technical skills to become a growth marketer. So people are like, I haven't really studied growth marketing. I might actually, and a lot of the times people are like coming from a psychology background or coming from even like a background that's like got nothing to do with business or, nothing to do with, what we would consider to be marketing. But really in reality, digital marketing tools change so quickly that, no one can really be decades ahead of you or even years ahead of you in terms of technical skills. It's just all about how you think about problems and execute experiments. So recently I actually saw a tweet from the creator of Fast API, Sebastian Ramirez. So he said that he saw a job post that required 4 years of experience in Fast API. And he, as a creator, couldn't actually apply for that job himself because he'd only created Fast API 1.5 years ago. So that really goes to show how, quickly best-in-class tech tools change and how proactive you really need to be to keep up with it, even if you are an industry veteran who's been around for years. So I definitely think like if you're entry level and you're scared of joining, you should just give it a go anyways.
All right. So, just circling back to, you mentioned, someone with all kinds of backgrounds can get into a growth marketing degree. How would that, I guess, play out in the real world? How would someone without a marketing degree get into a marketing role?
Yeah, so I think it's all about the way you think and also how you tackle problems. So I think, when it comes to searching for jobs, I think just really apply for as many entry-level roles as you can. Like spend a lot of time looking at the job descriptions, what they require, what sort of skills they're looking for, like the way that you think. Familiarize yourself with like the terms that they use. And in reality, like you can't really tell how good someone is until they're actually on the job. Like even the people who've been around for years, they could just be applying like skills that don't actually matter, or they're not using the right processes, and they're actually like potentially not doing a very good job at their job. So I think definitely the best ones are the people who are just really good problem solvers. So I definitely think, even if you just really latch onto any opportunity that you see on, say, LinkedIn, Message, I think, that really shows that your first step is already, you're passionate, you're interested, and also that you're curious. And I think that's the most important part. You have to constantly be curious. You're going to think about, what's never been done before that I can try and experiment with, and like not have that fear of trying things that you might not know are going to work. So people say, let's always fail fast. Let's run experiments. And, if you're going to run an experiment and you already know you're going to succeed, then is that an experiment at all, sort of thing? You want to try like the riskier stuff and things that people might not have otherwise tried before, like, Elon making a new battery, and actually just like seeing if that works or not. Like it could be a complete failure, but that's okay because you've learnt like why you failed, and then you can build on that and use that data to create something better.
Right, yeah. So from what I'm hearing, it sounds like a lot of your motivations behind jobs and career paths is focused around learning and trying to make the most of every opportunity. Is this like a mindset you would recommend to current students?
Well, it was actually quite interesting how I developed this mindset. I think I was very different when I was in high school versus when I was in university. So in high school, I was extremely introverted. So I spent most of my time probably observing people rather than interacting with people. So like this was actually what really got me interested in marketing in the first place, was the fact that, I was really interested in psychology. And that was why I picked my degree as well, was because I was so interested in psychology. I picked economics and finance because, I was asking questions like what drives people to make certain investment decisions, like such as irrational ones, like what we saw with GameStop, for example. And then, what are the psychological mechanisms such as biases that underlie economic behavior, and how do we develop them over time? And that was genuinely what I was interested in, both like in high school and, which carried on into uni. But the part with uni that I didn't like was, built like the theory and the modeling of like finance and in economics. And that's sort of why I transitioned into marketing. So when I was in uni, like because I was trying to spend so much time getting rid of this introversion, which I knew would hold me back in any career that I wanted to go into, I spent a lot of time just pushing myself out of my own comfort zone, facing every single fear that I had. And that included like networking with people. I remember my first time I went networking, there was someone from CBA. I literally had no idea what to ask them because I genuinely wasn't interested in banking. But at the time, it was very different because I thought that I really needed to fit into this mold of a commerce student, which meant, you have a penult internship, then you go into a grad role, and you have to like do well and like these certain things to get there. And I definitely felt like really pressured to fit that mold, even though, I knew sort of deep down that I didn't. And so, my first networking event, there was like this CBA guy, and I asked one question which I prepped, and it was like, what's your day-to-day look like? And he answered it, and then I had zero follow-up questions because I genuinely wasn't interested in his day-to-day. So like working over time to like sort of really push myself to talk to more people, understand, small talk, which is, sort of eventually when you move into, like actually full-time roles, you sort of realize there's a sort of formula to it. Monday to Tuesday, you'll just ask about like, what did you do over the weekend? On Wednesday, you're like, oh crap, hump day. And then Thursday and Friday, you ask about what they're going to do next weekend. And there's like definitely a formula to it now. But, back then I was like super introverted, and I spent most of uni just trying to push myself out of a comfort zone. And I guess that sort of filtered out into my career as well. Like I'd just like try new things, like move out of corporate, see if I would enjoy startups. And that's sort of how I got into that mindset. And I think it really paid off as well. And I think, because I experimented with my career, I was able to put myself in front of so many people that, I otherwise would have never been able to access and learn so much. Like I would just shamelessly ask people for coffee meetings, just learn from their experience. They would refer me onto other people. And because of that, I opened the doors to so many new opportunities. And I think that's like the great thing about just pushing yourself out of your comfort zone is just you really open doors, and nothing's luck. I think there is luck, but that like sometimes you make luck for yourself. And I think that's really what you need to do at university level, is to just develop your own luck. Yes, I think that's probably what impacted my career like the most. And I look back now and I'm so glad I was like that. Like now I look at uni students, and if they're a keen bean, I'm like, you're going to do really well in life, because I think you just have like the right mindset. And I think, developing it just all comes down to how much do you want to set yourself up for success.
Yeah, great. Awesome. I love how you said that, you create your own luck. I think that's a really great way to think about, I guess, life in general. So talking about, Spaceship and startups again, how would you describe the startup culture at Spaceship?
Yeah, so when I first joined Spaceship, it was very goal-oriented. So I think entering a startup world is really cool because everyone is just so motivated about what they do. They've all got really ambitious goals. And something that the founder had said to me back then was, you have to do something that's never been done before if you want to achieve something that's never been done before. And that sort of really set me into the mindset of, never settle for, what's worked in the past. Don't just copy and paste existing tactics. You sort of always have to look at the data and use that to drive your decisions. And I think, the culture at Spaceship was very high performance. So it was, but like the good thing about it at the same time was that it genuinely didn't feel like work. I just loved what I was doing so much that, sometimes I would come in at like 8 a.m. I'd leave at like midnight. Sometimes I was on the phones and I was still calling people on Friday at 10 p.m. and they'd be like, hey, like, are you from an overseas call center? It's 10 p.m. in Sydney time. And I was like, no, I'm actually just in the office, It's just me. And I just genuinely just really liked what I was doing. So I think, it's high performance, but because you're learning so much at such a fast pace, you're actually finding it to be really fun. And I think the good thing about startup culture is that, especially when you're working for a smaller startup, is that you end up doing a bit of everything. So you enter into a growth role. And because we only had 6 people, I did a bit of everything. So I ended up doing legal and compliance, ended up doing a bit of product. I ended up doing like customer service. And the great thing about having exposure to everything is that if you were going to start your own business afterwards, you'd have a really good idea of how exactly you want to start it. And I was always worried that, if I'd gone to a startup, it would make it really difficult for me to return to corporate if I'd ever wanted to go back because I didn't have the right skills or whatever. But actually corporates love it as well. So corporates love that you bring in like this experimental mindset to a corporate environment. They like everything that you've learned in the startup world. And actually like only, I think less than 1 year after I joined Spaceship and achieved everything I did at Spaceship, like I got a message from BCG asking me to join as a senior manager. So it was really crazy how, in uni, I could have never even envisioned joining BCG at all, especially like with my WAM and stuff like that. My WAM wasn't terrible, but it definitely did slip when I started doing full-time work at startups. But yeah, like never would have envisioned me working at BCG, but instead now BCG reaches out to me just because I had that, difference in thinking, because I had tried different experiences that, otherwise a normal uni student wouldn't have. So I think, yeah, startup culture is great. You learn so much. You learn at such a fast pace. You'll meet so many smart people. And it's just like a exposure to an experience that you never would otherwise get when you're at uni.
Yeah, awesome. So honestly, every guest we've had on here, we always talk about, this very important question, the importance of uni marks. We'd like to get your hot take on that. So, in your opinion, how important are uni marks? Is that something that employers still look for? Yeah, like what's your take on that?
I've literally never been asked for my WAM in my entire career. So I guess that goes to show how important it is. I do think it's important to have a uni degree. So after I left Spaceship, I did go back. I did uni at night. So I just did like 2 subjects per semester before you guys had trimesters. And I just did it at nighttime. And then during the day, I would do full-time work. That worked quite well for me. So I did end up graduating. My mum didn't disown me, which she did threaten to do if I didn't finish my uni degree. I think uni degrees matter. And I think, the good thing about uni is that it just develops so many different mental frameworks about how you think about problems. So, the way you approach financial modeling, for example, comes from like, how do you derive certain equations? And then how do you, play with assumptions to sort of form different results. And I think, that sort of has some relevance to the ways you think about even growth problems. And I think I definitely don't regret my degree in uni. I think marks wise, it just really depends on which career you want to do. Like in my line of, in my industry, I guess it doesn't matter. Like they don't really judge you based on your marks at all. So they judge you based on how well you actually do in the workplace. And how you think about problems, how keen you are, like how driven you are in terms of like how much you want to excel in the role. And uni marks don't play any part in that, but eventually, if you wanted to go to corporate, I think it does matter a bit. And if eventually, even if you're working for a fintech startup, like having a degree matters a lot. So again, like because I was in a startup, I got exposed to actually sitting on board meetings, actually creating the structure for Spaceship Super and Spaceship Voyager, and actually, sitting in meetings with like all the directors, signing them on and making sure that they were, eligible to be directors. And one of the requirements is actually having a uni degree, improving your competency. So one of the measures for competency would include stuff like a uni degree, and your marks in uni. And like, I guess like a fail in a subject wouldn't mean you're like absolutely cut off, but it does get considered sort of thing. So it just depends like where exactly you want to take your career. Like if you just want to work in startups in like a, non-fintech startup, for example, it doesn't really matter what you get. If you're thinking of, okay, I want to work in a fintech startup and actually I want to become, director of one day, then maybe you should like worry a bit about completing your degree and also getting a decent mark, because it does affect whether or not you can start sitting on boards of, like financial companies.
Yeah, so we've asked a few guests this question so far, and it's kind of It's interesting to get different perspectives on the importance of marks, like especially based on their different industries and career paths. But I suppose circling back to your past experiences as a freelance advisor for different organizations, like in that, how do you sort of determine what advice you're giving?
Yeah, so I actually just started freelancing, half because I don't know how to say no to opportunities, and also other half is because I actually wanted exposure to more business models and to train myself to think about, more growth strategies, tactics and tools, even if it wasn't really relevant to my like day-to-day job. And that's sort of why I started with freelancing. I think, when it comes to how do you come up with so many new things, I don't think they're new. So like sort of, again, like back to my interest in psychology, I think, when you work in marketing, you're actually just working on existing things that you already know about consumer psychology. So nothing in modern consumer marketing is new at all. So all we're doing is taking existing consumer psychology, translating it into a digital platform. So for example, when I was at Spaceship, I ran like a really successful waitlist program where I was able to acquire 40,000 people onto the waitlist, and that translated into $100 million in funds under management in just 4 months. And what I did there definitely wasn't a new idea. Like, for example, Robinhood a couple of months before me, actually launched a very similar waitlist referral program that did quite well as well. A few years before Robinhood on MSN, I used to tell all my friends, and to share this chainmail that said, share this to 7 friends or you'll be ugly forever. And I used to share that around. Even before that, like decades before MSN, people were passing notes from letterbox to letterbox, asking people to sign and if you want to become prosperous. And the psychology of what we do now, is probably referred to as FOMO, or just like social affirmation. But it's existed so long ago, and all you really do is apply, technology to distribute it at scale. And I just think that's really fascinating. And it's the same thing for like, when you're looking at new business models and how people make decisions, like the first thing you do is just really understand the psychology of your user. And then after that, it's about, okay, well, because this is my user, how do they discover products? So that determines what sort of marketing channels you're picking out for them. And then within this marketing channel, how do I perfect my messaging and delivery so that I can convince them to actually give this product a go? And I think, all of those are like very, very similar in terms of like the problems that you solve. I think all of you really need is just like constant exposure to it. So just constantly think about, how do really successful companies grow like with a very similar business model. And then whether or not like this type of thinking can be applied to a different company as well. So I spent a lot of time when I first started out just reading up case studies of, things like Airbnb, Uber, Tinder, and just like how did these massive behemoths grow to what they are now. And a lot of it actually is like super embedded in consumer psychology. So it's not like new tactics. It's just like all about distribution. So like Tinder's a great example because Tinder's like highly gamified. The whole idea of, you need a swipe to see what's next, is like this entire psychology around gamification. So it's the idea where it's like you constantly want to swipe to see what you don't know is next. You want to uncover the unknown. And so you keep swiping. And so you spend a lot of time on Tinder, just, swiping basically. And that's like a complete, like, it's a very deliberate thing that they've done there to increase the amount of time humans spend on Tinder. And it's very similar to how game developers develop games so that, you become addicted to them so that you never want to log off. And you spend your nights like 1 a.m. to 3 a.m. playing League of Legends with your friends, for example. It's just like all these like psychological gamification tactics that, we've known about for ages, just like distributed in a different way. So I think, freelancing for me is like really interesting because I get exposure to so many different problems and I get to, apply what I already know about human psychology to these businesses and create like very legitimate growth strategies for them.
So kind of linking back to what you mentioned at the end, what's been your favorite piece of advice that you've ever given to someone?
I think it's not really about like the best piece of advice I've given to someone. It's probably more about the best advice that I've received, which I've then forwarded on to everyone. So I'm just a bit of a copy and paste sort of thing. It's actually to just work on the most important project at the company at the time. And I think that gives you the best opportunity to learn. So, even though I'd started in a growth role, I wasn't scared to then move on to a licensing role because we really needed to get that superannuation license from APRA, which APRA hasn't given out in the past like 15, 16 years. So then I really worked really hard on that, and that sort of opened up so many opportunities for me to then, like really drive the strategy behind superannuation. Also, we would eventually get control over pricing and like how much, influence we have over the companies that sit in the investment portfolio. And so I think like the most important thing is to just like work on important projects, try to work on high impact stuff where first you're learning so much, and then two, like it just impacts the success of your company as well. And I think that's probably one of the best pieces of advice that I've ever received. And it's sort of like I received it maybe like 6 years ago, and it's really just stuck with me to this day.
Yeah, awesome. Just jumping ship a little bit now. Anna, if you were back at uni today, would you do anything differently?
Sort of like you said, my vibe at uni was just chaotic. I think, I probably wouldn't do too much different in terms of my experimentation. I think, everything I experimented with, whether it was, at a fault or like something that worked out successfully, I think it was all part of my learning journey, as to like, how to develop the skills I had now. So even though I made big mistakes, like, going in with like a marketing roadmap and telling someone to switch from B2B, which is where the money actually is, to B2C, where the money was not. I still don't regret any of that because it was just all part of my learning journey. And I had to learn that I was wrong. And I think like probably one of the best learnings I learned from that was that even though you might have something that seems perfect in your head, like, even like, for example, even very normal stuff, like whether it's in your career, like, I really want to write this email this exact way, and I think it's perfect and it's going to drive, a lot of email opens and a lot of click throughs, versus, even something like decorating your room and your mum's like, that's not going to be very practical, and you're like, no, it's perfect. I think everything you have in your head is just a hypothesis, and you don't know if you're right until you test it out. And so a lot of what happens is like it's all about, I guess, running an experiment and seeing if you're right first, and then really committing to it once you know you're right. And I think that's probably one of the best learnings I had, in uni as well. It's just like, you should really try to, like before you form like a very sure judgment, you should make sure that you test it out first, make sure you're right, and then sort of solidify your judgment. So like something I always say is like you should have strong opinions held weakly. So, be very open to changes in data, so that you can change your opinion, and you just have to be super open-minded. And I think about that in uni, I wouldn't change much about myself because I think I was very open-minded to experiments. Something I would change, is probably just how much pressure I had to fit into like a certain mold at uni. I think when you're a commerce student, like I said before, you know exactly what success looks like. Maybe it's like joining a society in your first year of uni, eventually becoming like a director, then eventually becoming executive. And then, when you're pre-penult, start applying for internships and get that internship. When you're penult, get the internship that you really want to become your grad role. Then when you're in grad, like obviously go to that grad role. And you sort of have this very clear path of what success looks like to you, and you feel very pressured to fulfill it. And that doesn't really leave that much space for like actually experimenting. And I think, when I was in uni, like I definitely felt super, super pressured, and I felt like, and it really affected my mental health to feel that pressured to do well at something. And a part of the reason was also because my mum is a CFO, and she like has a background that's really traditional finance. She manages like a really big pharmaceutical company and all the finances there. And the whole time she was like, why do you keep working for, a small company where it's so unstable, your job? Why don't you just go back into finance and banking where, you can have a very successful career? But in reality, like I probably wouldn't have that successful of a career in finance and banking. So I think, really trying to alleviate yourself from that pressure by trying more and more new things earlier on, so you can start ruling out what actually works for you, what doesn't work for you, is really important, I think. So I think the one thing I wish I could tell my earlier self is to not worry so much about, your friends going into investment banking and management consulting, when, you genuinely have no interest in it. Like I was sitting in finance classes and just like totally like rote learning these like financial formulas, not understanding what they actually meant, because I genuinely just had no interest in financial modeling. Whereas this is not true completely about me for finance. It's like I actually genuinely have an interest in finance. Like I am an active investor. I actually literally work for a fintech company, but I just had no interest in financial modeling. And it's really important to figure out what you like and what you don't like and use that to drive your career decisions. Like make everything an experiment. Use the data that you find out about, even if it's about yourself, and just use that to drive your decisions. And I think, so the regret I have is, feeling that, I guess it's not a regret, but I did feel a lot of mental pressure to do well in uni, to really fit that mold, especially because I was in like a society like BSOC where, there were so many successful people in finance. And I think, and I'm just glad that eventually I found my way out of it.
Yeah, so it sounds like you took a fairly, I guess, unconventional path for a typical commerce student. In that journey, like, did you find that you had any significant mentors along the way?
Yes, so I am so thankful to my mentors. So I was extremely lucky that when I was at Spaceship, the old head of growth of Canva called Andre Pinantoan, he basically joined Canva when it was like around 20 people, took it to like the $3 billion company, then got sick of managing people. So then he eventually started working on other startups as well. He was my mentor when I was at Spaceship, and he just taught me all the fundamentals. Every time I spoke to him, I genuinely felt like something I believed in was challenged, and like in a good way, where I was like, I've just never thought of it from that perspective before. And I think finding a mentor like that really, really helps. And I think, you should find probably people that you look up to, and just like learn from them, see how they've built their career. And I think I really sort of built my career based on how he built his career. So he was also the type, very similar to me, if you look at my LinkedIn, is that like we're both sort of like the type to, we work on a company when it's like really fun and really interesting. The moment we feel like our learning has stopped, we change. And like a lot, my parents frown upon it. Like I think a couple of people do frown upon that type of style working. But for me, it's like time is the one linear thing that you'll never get back. So, why would you waste time on a place that, you've stopped learning at? So I think, for me, like both as a life mentor and also as like a technical skills mentor, Andre was, really great for me. And every time he moved companies, he would always ask me to join, and we just sort of formed this big bond. And like the exciting thing I've got to say is that Andre joined as the VP of growth of HealthMatch. And that's why I'm joining HealthMatch as well. So that's like finally we get to work together. So I think, he's literally a mentor that's stuck with me for life. And I think if there's someone whose career path, you look to and you're like, I wish that was my career path, I think just hit them up on LinkedIn, talk to them. I literally reply to every like cold message from like a uni student or someone who genuinely wants to learn. I reply to all of them. I meet up with every single one of them. So I think, don't be scared to, reach out to someone if you're like, what they've done is something that I wish I could do in my career and I really want to find out how they did it. Just ask them, and, I'm sure they're happy to share their experiences with you.
Yeah, I think for a lot of students, it can be a bit difficult at times to kind of reach out to someone who seems to have so much more experience. Do you have any advice for students who kind of want to get their foot in the door and reach out to someone online?
Yeah, I think just be very clear with what you want to get out of it. So don't do something vague like, hey, can we grab a coffee? But at the same time, don't write, like 3,000 word essay on, exactly what you want to get out of it, like all the questions they need to answer, which might feel overwhelming to the person receiving it. I think just be general, like, hi, like I'm a uni student. I'm really passionate about your industry. I'm tossing up between, 2 different career options, and I really, was interested in what you've done, and I'd love to hear more about your experiences. Do you mind like running through that experience with me? I think something, short, snappy shows that you're genuinely curious and passionate and know what you want to ask. I think that's, quite helpful. Like don't be too brief and don't be too like verbose about like what you want to get out of it.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Anna. Well, that actually kind of, we'll get into the end of our, session together. But just as a wrap up, is there anything else you'd like to say about any of your experiences or any advice you'd like to give to current students?
Really spend your time in uni experimenting with your career. So I think you're just so safe in uni. Like no matter what you do, you've got uni to come back to. You're still going to get employed when you graduate because you've got this like awesome degree from a really renowned university. So this is like the best time for you to figure out what you like and what you don't like. And it's harder to experiment and take risks when you're deeper into your career. So, once you're earning a certain salary and you don't want to dip below it, it's going to be really hard for you to be like, okay, all of a sudden, I'm on 200K salary and now I want to start a startup. It's going to be really hard for you to give up that 200K salary, for example, when, your mortgage depends on it, your family depends on it. And you've got this like amazing track record as like, say, like an investment banker or a management consultant. It's very hard for you to make that decision later in your career, even if you're feeling like mediocre about, what you're actually working on. Whereas if you start testing now when you're in university, you've literally got nothing to lose. You don't have like, 10 years of investment banking experience behind your belt. You don't have, like a family that you have to consider when you're making career decisions. You don't have, a salary that you really need to keep to maintain your mortgage. You just have like all the chances in the world to figure out what you like and what you don't like. And I genuinely think that if you're worried about money, I think like actually I speak to a lot of uni students who are like, I sort of like startups, but are you guys just going to be homeless, until you like hit the jackpot with one of your startups? Like that's not the case at all. I think, if you have to be very smart in how you pick startups. And I genuinely think that if you find something you like, you'll always make money from it. Like money's not like a problem when you're really good at something that you love doing. So I think, for me, to be honest, like I'm just going to be very transparent about salary. Like when I joined Spaceship, I was on a salary that was higher than most grad roles at, your big four accounting firms. Before my friends even were able to start at a like management consulting firm, I was already earning more than them. And then now I'm pretty sure I earn more than like a lot of my peers. Like I genuinely think that startups is not like a bad place to go, even if the financial side is a massive consideration for you. There's actually so much money in technology. And, of course, they're like starting up a startup is going to be really difficult, like before you've received investment and before, you have like any experience to your name. But I don't think it's like to the point where, you're like really living an impoverished life and you're not getting paid. You're not like, working McDonald's rates, for example. Like you're actually going to be earning quite a bit. Like it's like fair. And I'd say it's like actually above market rate, if anything. So I really want to just get rid of the myth that you earn no money in startups. It's actually like a very well-funded industry. Maybe when I started, it was like a bit of an impoverished industry, but now it's like highly funded. And I think you'll probably actually start off on like a better rate than you probably would in big four accounting firms. And I can say this because my brother is like, has taken the corporate route and I do get a little bit competitive about salary. So, so I just want to put that out there. If that's the thing stopping you from like making that career decision, then don't worry about it. I promise you it's fine. Just be smart about which startup you pick.
Yeah, awesome. Well, on that great note, I guess thank you so much, Anna, for coming in today on this very cold Friday morning. But yeah, we really appreciated talking to you, and you gave us some really interesting insights to think about. So thank you so much for joining us.
No problem. Thanks for having me. Really enjoyed the chat as well.